It was supposed to be a simple fix, a $250 visa integrity fee to fund border security and reduce the deficit. But within days, the backlash spread globally. Major airlines are slashing U.S. flights. International travelers are canceling in record numbers. And entire industries, from airports to small towns, are starting to feel the blow. This isn't just a travel story, it's a signal. One policy, one price, and suddenly, America's role in global mobility is up for debate. Welcome to Geo Capitalist, where we decode global wealth, one power shift at a time. If you're interested in how policies like this reshape economies, industries, and alliances, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe and join a growing community tracking the real story behind the headlines. On July 25, 2025, buried deep within the latest federal budget, President Trump signed a provision that would set off shockwaves across global travel, a clause so small in print, yet massive in impact. It was called the Visa Integrity and Security Act. Few outside of Washington noticed it at first, but those who did found one number impossible to ignore: $250, the new mandatory visa fee for nearly all non-immigrant visitors entering the United States. The official justification: national security funding and deficit reduction. On paper, it looked like a tidy solution, nearly $29 billion in projected revenue over the next decade. But the reality was far messier. The U.S. positioned it as a patriotic contribution, a minimal price to experience America. But for countries like India, Brazil, and Mexico, it came across as something else entirely, a gatekeeping mechanism, disproportionately aimed at their citizens. Travel agencies scrambled to adjust. Foreign ministries lodged formal complaints, online forums filled with outrage, and quietly, resentment began to build. Even travelers using the U.S. visa waiver program felt the sting, as the ESTA fee nearly doubled from $21 to $40 without fanfare or explanation. The effect wasn't just economic, it was emotional. For millions, the cost of entering America was no longer just financial, it felt personal. Within days, you could feel it. The rules of global travel were being rewritten, not with a wall, not with a ban, but with a price tag. A quiet fee had triggered a loud message: the door is still open, but only if you're willing to pay. And that raises the question: how do you measure influence? In dollars? Or in who still wants to visit you? And when a country makes entry a transaction, does it lose the invitation? The global response wasn't slow. It was immediate and strategic. Within 72 hours of the visa fees announcement, international tourism boards began sounding alarms, not through dramatic boycotts, but through carefully worded advisories. Consider alternative destinations. What followed was a subtle, coordinated retreat. In Brazil and Mexico, family groups canceled trips. In India, travel forums erupted with stories of travelers caught off guard by new costs. What had once been routine now felt adversarial, as if the United States had quietly redrawn its welcome mat. But the most dramatic backlash didn't come from across oceans. It came from across the northern border. In Canada, the reaction wasn't about cost. It was about principle. Tensions had already been simmering from trade disputes and cross-border friction. The visa controversy lit the match. By March 2025, U.S. bookings from Canadian travelers plunged over 70%, and by summer, major airlines began scaling back routes. This isn't seasonal, one airline exec admitted. This is strategic recalibration. Tourism ministers started speaking up. Airlines adjusted flight plans. Even UK travel conglomerates began promoting Japan, Portugal, and even Canada itself over the US, not for luxury, but for ease. The narrative had flipped. America wasn't being skipped because it lacked appeal, but because it no longer felt accessible. A fee designed to strengthen borders was now weakening perception, and in international travel, perception is policy. As one diplomat in Brussels warned, tourism is soft power, and the US is quietly giving it away. So what happens when a superpower becomes less visited? What's the long-term cost of no longer being the world's first destination? While politicians debated the merits of a $250 fee, the global airline industry responded the only way it knows how, with numbers. Seat demand, booking velocity, profit margins. And in the weeks after the policy's announcement, those numbers were all pointing in the same direction: down. Air Canada quietly slashed flights to New York and Chicago. LATAM scaled back service to Miami. Lufthansa began pulling aircraft from U.S. routes in favor of more lucrative corridors in the Middle East and Asia. And just like that, the invisible engine of globalization, air travel, began decoupling from the American market. These weren't isolated moves. They were part of a pattern. When fewer travelers book, airlines don't wait for a memo from Washington. They reroute, reassign, and retreat. For some, it was a tactical shift. For others, it felt like something bigger, a vote of no confidence in America's role as a global hub. And the silence from Washington was deafening. There was no emergency session, no tourism rescue plan, no industry roundtable. Because officially, nothing was broken. But the data told a different story. International arrivals at U.S. airports down 22%, and dropping. Airlines spoke through action, and their message was clear. If the U.S. makes it harder to come, we'll stop trying to bring people in. This wasn't a boycott. It was a recalibration, not political, but financial. At what point does rerouting a flight become a shift in global trust? And when the sky starts clearing over American airspace, is it a temporary storm or a long winter ahead? By the way, if you're watching this and thinking, wait, why is no one talking about this? Comment the word airlines below. Let's see how many of us are actually paying attention to the deeper story. Across the U.S.-Canada border, local economies built on cross-border foot traffic began to unravel. Cities like Buffalo, Niagara Falls, and Bellingham had long relied on a steady flow of day trippers and international tourists. But by mid-2025, that traffic had all but vanished. Parking lots that once filled with Ontario plates were now ghost towns. Duty-free shops reported revenue declines of up to 50%, and local restaurants slashed hours or closed altogether. The fallout wasn't limited to border towns. Orlando's international terminal, usually buzzing with visitors from South America and Europe, saw a sharp decline in arrivals. In New York, airport retail vendors who paid premium rent for foot traffic began quietly pulling out. And yet, where was the national conversation? Why weren't we asking what happens when the world's most visited country becomes optional? Or more pointedly, what does it say when the infrastructure is still open but no one's coming? In Washington, there was no emergency stimulus because there was no official crisis. The terminals still operated. The planes still landed. But the people were gone. This isn't just a story about fewer flights. It's about deadweight infrastructure, terminals, border crossings, hotels, transit lines, all built for an international economy that is now rejecting the very premise of U.S. travel. And it's not just economic loss. It's symbolic. When global citizens choose to go around you, not through you, the message is clear. Power is shifting. not because of a war or a trade deal, but because of a $250 decision that changed the psychology of movement. The U.S. didn't close its borders, it priced them. And now the global system is quietly recalibrating, without waiting for permission. While airlines adjusted routes and border towns braced for impact, another shift was happening, one that won't show up on any arrival board. Diplomats across the global south began raising questions not about travel logistics, but about principle. India's foreign ministry issued a subtle but sharp statement questioning the intent behind the fee, calling it misaligned with modern international cooperation. Brazil's tourism board openly criticized what they labeled a paywall on diplomacy. And within the EU, whispers began circulating about a reciprocal fee, a tit-for-tat charge on Americans entering Europe. Because if travel is no longer about trust, but transaction, why not charge back? Behind the scenes, U.S. embassies began reporting fewer interview bookings and a notable spike in visa deferrals. Some consulates even saw a 30% decline in student visa interest, a category once considered bulletproof. As one analyst in Berlin put it, the U.S. spent decades building cultural bridges through education and tourism. This policy is starting to burn them. The irony? The U.S. introduced the fee to protect national interests, but it's now hurting one of its greatest exports, influence. And here's the bigger question we should all be asking. What happens when travel becomes a geopolitical signal, not just a personal choice? If choosing not to visit the U.S. becomes a quiet protest, are we witnessing the emergence of a new kind of boycott? One built not on slogans, but on silence. The real cost of a visa fee may not be paid in dollars, but in diplomatic distance. And as that distance grows, so does the long-term damage to America's global standing. Supporters of the visa integrity fee have one clear argument: money. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that the policy could generate $28.9 billion over the next decade. That's nearly $3 billion a year in additional federal revenue aimed squarely at funding immigration enforcement and chipping away at the ballooning national deficit. On paper, it's hard to argue with those numbers. After all, isn't it fair that foreign visitors help offset the cost of border infrastructure they use? But here's the problem. Economics doesn't live on paper. It plays out in people, in decisions made, flights canceled, conferences skipped, and investments postponed. For every dollar gained through the new visa fee, how many more are lost through reduced tourism, canceled events, and a declining reputation as a global hub? According to the U.S. Travel Association, international visitors spent over $239 billion in the U.S. in 2023 alone. A small percentage drop in that figure, triggered by backlash, could easily erase the projected gains from the fee itself. And then there's the multiplier effect. When a family from Brazil cancels their Florida vacation, it's not just ticket revenue that disappears. It's hotel bookings, restaurant meals, park admissions, car rentals, and tips for service workers. Thousands of microtransactions that never happen. So the question becomes, is a guaranteed $250 per visitor worth the risk of losing $2,500 they might have spent inside the country? Even within Congress, some fiscal conservatives are growing uneasy. As one senator privately admitted, it looks like a quick win, but we may be taxing the wrong thing, interest in America. And that's a cost that's much harder to calculate, and even harder to recover from. The visa fee may have started as a budget line item, but its ripple effects extend far beyond airports. In many ways, it's become a symbol, not just of U.S. immigration policy, but of America's evolving stance toward the rest of the world. For decades, the U.S. positioned itself as open, aspirational and accessible, a place people dreamed of visiting, studying in, or building a life. That soft power didn't come from tanks or treaties, it came from open doors. Now, with a single fee, that image is shifting. And the world is noticing. Foreign governments aren't just rethinking tourism, they're rethinking trade trips, university partnerships, and diplomatic visits. Business leaders from Asia and Latin America are quietly choosing to meet in London or Dubai. Not because they dislike America, but because entering it now feels like a political act. And that changes everything. Because when movement becomes politicized, trust begins to erode. And in geopolitics, trust is leverage. We have to ask, is this fee the beginning of a broader trend? A shift from welcome mat to velvet rope? For a nation that once prided itself on being a global magnet for talent, capital, and culture, that's a dangerous pivot. It suggests a new posture, transactional, defensive, and increasingly closed off. And here's the irony. As China and the EU invest heavily in attracting global talent, the US is erecting new financial walls, not with legislation everyone sees, but with micro-policies most people don't. In doing so, it may be undercutting its own long-term competitiveness. Because when the best and brightest choose to go elsewhere, the loss isn't measured in tourist dollars. It's measured in future influence. As of now, the visa integrity fee has been signed into law, but the Department of Homeland Security hasn't announced an exact start date. That uncertainty alone has left consulates scrambling and travelers second-guessing. Legal experts suggest the rollout could face challenges from civil rights groups or foreign governments arguing it violates diplomatic reciprocity agreements. But even if no legal action is taken, the real impact may already be locked in, because perception doesn't wait for implementation. International media has framed the policy as part of a larger shift, the U.S. embracing transactional diplomacy in all forms, from tariffs to travel. And as 2025 unfolds, more countries are considering their own response. The EU Commission is reportedly exploring a visa parity mechanism to mirror fees imposed on EU citizens. The African Union has held closed-door talks on redirecting educational partnerships toward Asia. And in Latin America, airlines are restructuring their 2026 route plans, with less focus on U.S. destinations and more emphasis on regional travel hubs. Domestically, the political class remains split. Trump's base sees the fee as a sovereignty win and a budget fix. Critics call it a self-inflicted wound at a time when American influence is already under pressure. And the travel industry? They're not waiting to find out. Lobbyists are preparing a full campaign to push for a rollback before the holiday season, one of the most lucrative windows for international travel. So, what's next? That depends on whether the U.S. sees this policy as a tactical fee or a strategic signal. If it's the latter, then the consequences go far beyond airline schedules. They reshape how America is accessed, experienced, and ultimately perceived. And in a global system built on movement, that perception is power. If you found this breakdown valuable, watch our next video. It connects directly to what's unfolding. And don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us decode these global shifts without compromise. Let us know in the comments. Is this just about visas? Or is it about something bigger? Are we witnessing the rise of a new travel-based diplomacy or the quiet collapse of American soft power? Either way, the world is watching. This was Trump's $250 visa fee backfires, airlines/US flights. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.